One more time. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, excellent. Cool. How's that? One more time.
All right, finally, welcome to AsobiFM. I'm your host, Jinden9, and accompanying me today is our guest once again.
Tom Enforcer Anubis.
Yeah, otaku entrepreneur himself. So, I wanted to start this off by talking about our topic for today. The world has changed, and the subcultural space has been changing along with it. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit later on, but first off, I'd like to talk about the things that we have been doing in the meantime. It's been a while since I've been on the air, so I guess I have to look back at 10 months of doing things. So, unless it's pertaining to the current season at the moment, I'm not going to be talking about all of the anime that I've been watching, but I'd like to start off by saying that I have been doing some professional things in the subcultural space. I have been working for a vendor called Otaku Quartermaster, and I've done a few conventions. I did Kineticon and Anime NYC and a couple of Airsoft events. I will talk a little bit more about Otaku Quartermaster later on in the show, but now I guess I'll talk about the anime I've been watching this season. Technically not this season. I started getting back into One Piece, which has been an adventure. The worst thing about One Piece is it's actually really good for a shonen, because that's the worst part, only because you end up having to watch a shit ton of screen time to get caught up with a lot of things. And one very helpful thing that the lady and I have been using is something called One Pace. It is a subgroup who take out all of the lingering shots and filler things and all that kind of stuff. And they actually condense 2 episodes together into one 30-minute runtime.
Huh.
Yeah, so it makes catching up a lot easier. And it also, because if you actually look at how much of an episode of One Piece is actually original content versus the opening and the recap and all of that stuff, you end up looking at about, only about 2/3 of an episode's runtime is going to be actual new stuff, and alongside that, you also have a lot of lingering shots and stuff that Toei Animation is known for throughout the years. So that has been kind of a lifesaver, being able to watch it in a shorter, condensed format rather than watching 15 episodes and it takes up the amount of time that 15 episodes would take up.
Right.
As far as seasonal stuff, Dress Up Darling, or Bisque Doll, depending on which title you're using, has been really good. Really, really enjoying that. I haven't seen the final episode yet. I know that it came out yesterday or the day before, so that's what I've been doing. And how about yourself?
Lately, I've been getting back into manga.
Nice, nice.
Like, I'm finding myself going to the bookstore every week or so,
Hmm.
and so I've been just picking up one or two books every week. I recently finished the first volume of The Girl in the Arcade, first volume of 2.5 Dimensional Seduction. There's still a few I have that I haven't read through yet.
Hmm.
But I used to not be really big on manga because I hate buying stuff in parts.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that.
But because I've been going to the bookstore so often, I figure I'll just catch any new releases that come through anyway.
Hmm. I One of my main reasons for not reading a lot of manga recently is just a lot of screen distraction, and I that is something that I have to start working on avoiding, using my phone every moment I have, being on some sort of screen at all times. Like, I should start reading physical books before bed because I have started to measure my backlog not by volumes, but if you stack them on top of each other by inches and feet. So, looking at the corner right now, I have about 2.5 feet of things that I have not been able to, or not been able to. I've just chosen not to read them.
Yeah, I'm really no better. Like, I have a whole bunch of light novel, first volume of this, first volume of that I've bought and intend to read but haven't gone through.
Hmm. It's yeah, it is one of those things where I will go through and I'll be like, oh, that's the continuation of this thing that got animated a while back, and I want to see the continuation of it because I haven't. I was anime only, and now I'm going to swap over to the manga because I don't think that it's going to get a second season or something like that.
Right.
But then I end up looking, and I have half of Nichijou to get through. There's another series, I think it's called City, that's done by the same mangaka as Nichijou.
Yep.
What else do I have? I have a lot of I can't really see the spines from here, but Tomo-chan is a girl, Nagatoro. I have a lot of stuff that I need to start actually reading through again. And a couple other things which I started both of these and I haven't gone through them. The first is A History of Hentai Manga by Kimirito. Starting it off, it is very dense, very interesting. It is very, very in depth and talks about like sources for all of these things and like case studies, and it is an academic treatise, and it's something that I need to start like getting into reading. And this is one of those things where I'd always be like, oh, if you, these people who are like getting way too into literary analysis and stuff like that, when they have the little dog ears and they have highlighters when they're reading or they're underlining things and stuff. But looking at this is something that I know I'm going to be using a lot of sticky notes with.
Yeah. Yeah, I did the same thing when I read, what was it? Database Animals.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
I went through and took notes in that book. I don't take notes in the book anymore. Usually I use index cards now.
Yeah, yeah. That's something like I don't want to actually write inside a book, but that's when I want to get sticky notes for this kind of stuff. but it's
Yep.
also one of those things that you have to set aside the time, and this isn't something that I can just start reading before bed because I'm going
Yeah.
to get really into it. I think the last time I ended up reading through an entire series was Aku no Hana, Flowers of Evil.
Mm.
That was, I started reading it at like 7 o'clock at night, and I stopped at 7 o'clock in the morning. That was a time when I was between jobs, so I could technically afford to stay up that long. But that was the
Right.
last that was a good like 3 or 4 years ago, and that was the last time I did an all nighter. Um, the second thing that I need to get through, and this is no insult to you because it's something that I need to actually process in the same way that I need to do a history of hentai manga, is your book, Otaku Entrepreneur.
Mm.
Because I picked that up and I started the first chapter, and then I have been meaning to continue on that, and I feel kind of like garbage that I have a personal friend who has written something that I have not gotten around to. So,
No, don't worry about it.
yeah.
Like you, I'm bad with books, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to get better.
I think it's a very modern thing, and especially the past couple years, that's kind of been exacerbated. So that's
Yeah.
something to talk about a little bit more. But,
But yeah, I've been getting back into manga. I've been slowly getting back into light novels. I
mm,
One seasonal thing that I did watch over the course of the past year and change was bottom tier character Tomazaki,
mm-hmm,
and that's one that I had started the light novel on, and I think I'm almost done with volume one. I was almost done with volume one by the time the anime came out.
mm,
So I watched the anime, and I'm probably going to get back into the light novel of that. And like I said, there's a whole bunch of things that I either have to start on or have started on and need to continue on. There's some stuff that I bought, haven't started on, and since then the anime for that has come out.
mm. That, so I don't know if it's going to be something that it's a professional demographic thing or anything, but we have a couple of people who work in engineering who go to the local airsoft field, and they are regulars with Otaku Quartermaster.
Mm.
And both engineers, every time we have bottom tier character, that gets sold to them pretty much immediately. They come in, they're like, oh, I'm going to get this, 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 and this, and then they sell us out.
I think it probably is an engineer thing.
It might be. I need to look into what the crossover is there.
It's like having more of an affinity for
Mm.
machines and things and wanting to learn how to have an affinity for people.
Okay, all right. If that is topical there, I will need to look a little bit more into that.
Yeah, that's basically what bottom tier character Tomazaki is. It's like if Iyashike.moe made an anime.
Mm. All right. Yep, that makes sense. It's
But yeah, that's been it for the most part for me. I
mm,
haven't watched a whole hell of a lot, at least not seasonally. Like I rewatched all of Nadesco at one point. I
mm,
did watch all of the Magnificent Kotobuki,
mm,
and that I felt was really good. So the animation style is kind of weird and might throw some people off because it uses the 3D CG sort of thing for the characters,
mm,
but it's a it's World War II Japanese airplanes doing dogfights. It's kind of like Crimson Skies. If people are
mm,
familiar with that.
mm. I remember knowing a little bit about Crimson Skies, but I was more like I was very into Strike Witches back in the day, but it was there was a lot of overlap between those two fandoms
Mm.
or fandoms enjoyers, I don't know. That's something that I've been I've been thinking about a lot lately, but um definition between like a fan versus something else.
Yeah.
But that's something to get into a little bit later.
But yeah, that's really about it.
Mm. There's something that I'm picking up on Laserdisc. Um I forgot the title of it, but it is a like early mid 90s anime with the Air Self-Defense Forces of Japan. I found a very inexpensive Laserdisc, but I don't have a Laserdisc player, and I'm kind of kicking myself because about like 10 years ago, you go to any Goodwill or Savers, you'd find Laserdisc players pretty much everywhere, but
Oh yeah.
now you can't find them anymore, or at least not around here. But
801 TTS Airabats is the anime you're talking about.
thank you. I knew you would know that. Um,
I remember I saw a Laserdisc edition of Macross Plus at at Anime Boston one time,
mm,
and I was really tempted, but I don't have a Laserdisc player, and it's not like that time I bought a copy of Virtual On and didn't have a Sega Saturn to play it on for like a few years
yeah.
because I knew I was gonna get a Sega Saturn eventually. I don't know if I'm gonna get a Laserdisc player eventually.
Yeah, that's it, and it's not as if it's something like a collecting Blu-rays before you have a Blu-ray player or something like that. Something that I did back before I got a PS4. In this case, it's like a Laserdisc is pretty much the size of an LP record.
Yeah,
So that's not something that you can just have like stashed away somewhere. That's something that you need to keep in a certain environment, in a certain uh, air moisture content kind of deal, and it's something that's so large that it's going to be a little bit cumbersome when you're moving it from place to place.
yeah, exactly.
So it's just something that I just saw that and I'm like, it was $13 and the shipping was free, and I'm just I need to buy it. So
Yeah. I probably would have bought it at that price. If
yeah.
Macross Plus was that price, I would have bought it on
Oh
its
yeah,
own.
definitely. But if I could get into the news a little bit, recently, I think this was announced either yesterday or the day before. This is kind of a double whammy. Crunchyroll, after gaining the entire library to Funimation because they are merging services, after getting their entire library, apparently Sentai Filmworks is removing their things from the Crunchyroll library and moving them to be exclusively on High Dive. So this is something that it depends on who you ask, but it can be viewed in one of two ways. You can view it in a positive way, in that Sentai is actually trying to fight back against this sort of centralization, this corporate centralization of anime, in that you have Crunchyroll is the place to get any anime. So they're trying to avoid that monopoly, which is a good thing. But on the other side of the coin, we're still dealing with the same issue where you need to buy a subscription to several different products, which are of extremely varying quality, including the quality of just user interface, that don't seem to be addressed by the companies that are running these things. One of the reasons why I switched over from One Piece streaming to One Pace, the condensed version of One Piece, is because we got to an arc on Funimation's website where the entire arc didn't have any English subs.
Hmm.
So the only and the bad part about this was it was a flashback arc. So the entire arc was some of the main characters as kids. And I don't know, it's a your mileage may vary thing, but if you want, first of all, you don't want to swap between Japanese dub and English dub, like,
Right.
at will. So that kind of sucks. But the second issue was English dubs don't do children very well. They hardly do teenagers very well.
Yeah.
It's something that I notice a lot, that a lot of these voice actors have been in the game for so long that they start to show their age in their voice. But they have been typecast as these characters who are going to be between the ages of like 14 and 19. But they still sound like they're like a 40-something-year-old trying to sound like a 19-year-old Valley girl. And it's just a very off-putting thing. But in terms of male voices, it's not that much better. Because there's one character, Ace, who is just being voiced by the same English voice actor, and just ends up sounding like the same age as like the main story, trying to imitate themselves at the age of, I think he was like 10 in this this flashback thing. So it was very off-putting, but we ended up having to switch over to One Piece because we couldn't watch subs because there were no subs.
Right.
Which was a huge annoyance because it was like, yeah, I paid for this, but I'm not getting what I wanted to get out of it. And that is just the worst feeling in the world. When you're actually paying for something and you're paying a premium for it, but then you don't actually get the chance to use it.
Yeah, that's like back when I was subscribed to Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
And for the longest time, it just didn't work.
Exactly.
Like, it did not work on my PC. And I had no idea why, and I was still paying for it for a while until they did something else egregious. Then I decided, you know what, I'm just going to cancel my subscription because I'm not using it anyway.
Yeah. That was, so there are 2 shows that I have not watched because of technical issues with Crunchyroll. The first one is Girls und Panzer, which I tried watching Girls und Panzer separated by 3 years. And it's just, for some reason, any other show on the platform was fine, but Girls und Panzer, the frame rate was like 4 frames a second.
Ooh.
Just for Girls und Panzer. So I just couldn't get through that, and it just always left a sour taste in my mouth, it was because of Crunchyroll's user interface and how they were doing the coding for that. But it was also just like, it was leaving a sour taste in my mouth where I just didn't want to watch Girls und Panzer. I was just like, other people were enjoying it and I liked the characters and everything. It's just I couldn't watch it. The other one is The Eccentric Family, I believe it's titled. It's about a 2 brothers who are tanuki, who are, I couldn't get through it because the thing is with buffering, when you see that little red or that little like gray line underneath like a YouTube video or something, that's called the buffer.
Right.
The thing about the buffer is it's not saying that, okay, it is 15 seconds to 3 minutes ahead of where you're watching. That just represents how much of the video has been, in quotes, downloaded to your computer for you to watch. That doesn't show where in the timeline it is. It just shows how much of the whole video has been buffered. The thing with Crunchyroll is, when I was living in a more high density area, I was in a condo in an old mill building. And whenever the bandwidth was very low, I couldn't load, it wouldn't load videos when I was streaming as quickly as I would like. But the thing with Netflix and any other streaming service was it would either let you pause and then continue loading, or it would dip down the quality a little bit. So it would
Right.
go from 1080 to like 720 or down to like 480, which I'm essentially legally blind anyway, so it didn't really make a difference to me, and I refuse to wear glasses because I look like a dad. Uh, but I would be fine with that. But with Crunchyroll, what it would do, and I don't know if it still does this, is it would skip the parts that haven't been loaded in. So if I was watching, say, Eccentric Twins or Hero Academia or something like that, it would literally skip 30 seconds and then another 30 seconds and then play like 4 seconds of the video, and then it would skip several minutes. And that's not really, and even if you paused it, it would just stop buffering. So it wouldn't load in. So this was something that pretty much everybody who didn't have like a perfect gigabit connection, they were having to deal with this stuff loading at just a snail's pace. And especially nowadays, because it's like, if somebody is using Crunchyroll, I'm assuming that they're going to be like watching things on their phones or on a Chromecast or something like that, like the consumer grade things,
Yeah, some kind of app.
which I won't even get into apps with Crunchyroll because holy hell. But yes, they're going to be using some sort of consumer grade app or something like that, which they're not going to have an Ethernet connection. They're going to be doing it through wireless or Wi-Fi. And that's going to compound the issue because you're not going to have the right connection. So a lot of people are going to just be missing out on a lot of things, or they're just going to be so frustrated with this stuff that they're just going to stop using it. Alternatively, if you are on a computer, you already have access to the big evil T word and the big evil P word that you're just going to become so frustrated that you're just going to open up a certain website, you're going to click a little magnet icon, and you're in like 4 minutes, you're going to get like the next 5 episodes, and you can just play it on VLC Media Player. So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot in both ways like that. But going back to people who are a little bit more casual into this stuff, and that's what Crunchyroll is trying to go for, if you're a little bit more casual, you're going to be more attracted to watching things with ads, which is not going to be an option much longer, which is the second news thing regarding Crunchyroll that came out recently, is they used to, at one point, you could watch an episode of a simulcast a week after it came out for paying members, but you would have to watch it with ads. Now they are not even allowing that. They are not allowing week delay simulcasts for people who are watching with ads enabled. So it's essentially forcing people to get a Crunchyroll subscription. So it's not as if I have a degree in business and I don't know how to organize or I don't know how to market or make sure that you're keeping yourself above cost for running a larger business, but it just seems to me as if it's kind of a slap to the face for people who are still using Crunchyroll, especially given that Crunchyroll has been dealing with a lot of user issues, and they've been dealing with a lot of bad publicity, I guess you'd say.
I mean, Crunchyroll is really no stranger to making bad moves that make a lot of people upset. My my question is, especially regarding the removal of the ad-supported model,
Yeah.
because my understanding from a business perspective is that the ad-supported model is more scalable
It
than
is
the subscription model.
it is more scalable, and it is by far their biggest revenue generator.
Yeah, because they had, last I checked, they had like an order of magnitude or something like that more people who watch the anime on there for free than paid subscribers.
Yes. And if you're watching long format things like a standard 23-minute episode of something, it is not as the ads are not as intrusive, but they put the same amount of ads in a 23-minute episode as a 3-minute miniseries.
Ooh.
Yeah. So there was Shinobi-chan and Nobunaga, I think, was one of those things. It was a 3-minute anime episode, and it's a long-running series, so you could binge watch all of these 3-minute episodes. It was very similar to Hetalia when that had an anime,
Right.
but you were getting the same amount of ads as you were when you were watching something a little bit longer. Like, that was ridiculous, and that was something that I felt like I was being forced into buying a subscription. Because this is something, they have not been respecting their customers for a long time. And
yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It seems to me, if that's the case, that the ad-supported model has basically been neglected.
yes, absolutely, they've been trying to go for the subscription model, even though that's not the thing that's making them the most money. And I'm wondering why they made that call. But the second thing that I'm wondering why they made there's a lot of things that I'm wondering why they make these calls. But once upon a time, when I first started out using Crunchyroll, they had different levels of plan. So you have the basic plan where you would get access to anime only. And then you have the advanced plan where you got access to anime and manga. And then you had a super advanced plan because back in the day, once again, Crunchyroll was known as anime and Asian drama. And now it's just anime. So, first of all, you kicked out all the people who were watching the dramas. Second off, they merged the manga and anime into one basic subscription package. So I believe at that point I had ended up paying in advance for a year, and then they merged the two into a basic plan after I had paid I think something like $30 more than I would have paid for a basic plan to get a full year, and I didn't get that $30 back a month after they merged the plans. So I paid $30 extra for nothing.
Right.
So that was the first thing that actually really pissed me off, because I didn't really care about the Asian drama thing anyway. And then they started doing the other things, which there were a few things that people were upset about with their game, their in-house game localization and all that kind of stuff. I didn't really use Crunchyroll for games at all, and I didn't really see a reason to, but that was something that I was wholeheartedly against what they were doing. And then when I started actually trying to communicate, hey, are we going to get fixes for all of these technical issues that you guys have been having? I got blocked by their PR director, who doesn't work there anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, he left.
Yeah.
It's weird. It seems like Crunchyroll has been pulling back from doing all the things that people like them for doing besides anime.
Yeah.
and then branching out into a whole bunch of things that nobody asked them to branch out into.
Exactly.
I don't know who was asking for them to do games. I don't know who was asking for them to do original series. I don't know who was asking for them to do stuff like the anime awards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know
Or
who was asking for them to do their own convention.
I don't know who is asking for them to just make their entire corporate space into a model of, for some reason, should be a scramble.
Yeah, yeah. It's a whole bunch of like they're doing everything nobody's asking them to do and nothing that people are asking them to do.
Yeah.
And it seems like anytime anyone has like a pro consumer idea, they do something that's the complete opposite.
Mm.
Now, what I will say is, I 100% get why the all the Sentai properties are leaving Crunchyroll,
Oh, I
and
get
that's
it too.
because a lot of people, a lot of people, I guess, don't seem to remember this, but Sentai was acquired by AMC Networks. AMC Networks, is that the code? Yeah, AMC Networks.
Hmm.
So, similarly to how when Funimation got acquired by Sony, all the Funimation properties left Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
AMC Networks acquired Sentai, so they're not going to want Sentai's stuff on Sony's platform. They're going to try to build up their own platform.
Mm.
Which I get why people are upset, but at the same time, I don't know. Like, I don't know how we avoid a monopoly on anime streaming. Besides, like, so it's gonna be basically Netflix and Crunchyroll.
Yeah.
If stuff like this doesn't happen.
Exactly. And the thing is with especially because Sentai Filmworks does a lot with High Dive. If most of Sentai's main library is on Crunchyroll, why would they get a High Dive subscription other than the fact that High Dive is generally easier to use than Crunchyroll?
Exactly. The thing about people, it was a big deal some years back. People were talking about how exclusivity is harming the anime streaming space, and the thing about it is, if you're trying to grow a new streaming service, say you're High Dive up against Crunchyroll,
Yeah.
the primary thing you have to compete against Crunchyroll is exclusivity. Because it doesn't matter if you're making a better product. If everyone's already on Crunchyroll, that inertia is going to keep them on Crunchyroll until something breaks, until a straw breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
And unless you have some other type of value proposition to get customers in the door, your business might not survive up until the point where you do get that straw that breaks the camel's back.
Mm-hmm. That is,
so
yeah.
It's unfortunate that we can't all go to one streaming service that's good and get all the anime we want, but at the same time, that's the only way we get good streaming services.
Is that competition.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, you would have the production/licensing of these properties being wholly economically divorced from the streaming side of things. So having a neutral streaming platform that doesn't have these that doesn't have exclusives on it, but they're hosting things from Funimation, from Sentai, from I can't even remember. Like I could list you off a shit ton of like I would get kind of pilloried for this, but I would start saying things like Bandai Entertainment and ADV and all these things that are not around anymore. Yeah, exactly. Because I keep on like I will start saying like, oh, this, and then I'm talking about things that have been gone and dead for 10, 15 years. I'm like, oh no. But yeah, so in an ideal world, you'd have that as a neutral, like the place where you watch it would be neutral away from the people who have the economic interests in having these things under their licensing belt. But at the same time, that's not economically viable.
Well, yeah, the issue is that, and I've said this before in many places, the the anime licensing industry in North America and other places is basically trying to do with anime something anime wasn't designed to do, which
Exactly.
is sell the anime itself as a product. It's like if I went to Geico and offered them $0.8 million to buy up the rights to all the Gecko commercials,
Yeah,
and I put all those on a Blu-ray and tried to sell that. Oh, and by the way, if Geico makes any more money selling more insurance off of that, I'm not entitled to any of that money.
exactly.
I only get what I get paid by selling the Blu-ray. So I'm gonna have to come up with other ways to make money off of this only one product that I have, which is the rights to the Gecko commercials. So
And
I can put those on a streaming service and sell a subscription to that streaming service. But what I'm not going to do is license that out to a different streaming service because that's not going to make me quite as much revenue. They're
ex-
gonna that's introducing a middleman where I definitely don't want a middleman because I'm already on a shoestring budget trying to sell these Gecko commercials.
exactly, and that's where the narrative that a lot of people have been pushing back on, with economic interests in the licensing industry. They push back on this whole thing where it's like, okay, so if you want to support an anime, you have to buy the merchandise for it. And then they try to push back against that. And it's like, well, that's how it's designed to work in its domestic market. Like, you're going to have an anime and it's going to be selling tickets to pop-up cafes. It's going to be selling the merchandise associated with it. Meanwhile, Funimation doesn't make money when things that they made, things that they did dubs for and that they licensed, if, say, J-List sells figures from that series, Funimation isn't going to be making money off of the American sales of those things. So they have an interest in trying to quash the idea that the anime is not the product. When the anime itself is not the product, it's not designed to be the product. It's it is a
Right.
yeah.
And like, especially when the anime is made to sell, say, the manga or the light novel,
Yeah.
another company in the US has those rights to the manga and the light novel.
So Funimation
So
isn't going to be making money off of Yen Press.
exactly.
Meanwhile, in the original in the original, sorry, in the production committee model, you have Kadokawa, who is part of the production committee, who pitched up a bunch of the money to go towards making the anime, and then they get their return on investment not through the anime itself, but through selling the manga that they've had, or Bushiroad with trading cards, or try to think of other examples, like Good Smile Company will be part of production committees for anime that they're going to start selling the Nendroids and Figmas from. So they're getting a return on investment, just not a return on investment from the actual thing that they funded, but what it generates in the subculture.
Exactly.
Which is something, because we don't have all of that flowing among, it's very standardized that Funimation makes the dub and does the license. Crunchyroll does the streaming, and then Yen Press or Dark Horse does the manga. They don't. These are separate companies that they didn't put an investment into the same property. They put investments into licensing the property in different media.
Right. They're all downstream from the production committee.
Exactly. So it's a distillation sort of, where you're using square pegs and trying to put them into round holes. Like, they will fit. It goes in the square hole. But it doesn't, it's not what it was made to do. It's not what's going to be the best return on investment, because you're not getting a return on investment on things that are being sold in other spaces.
Right.
Which is it is a little bit of a conundrum, to say the least.
It's a difficult position for licensing companies to be in, and on some level, that's kind of by design.
Hmm. It
Because
is, yeah.
if so, the more I would posit that the more ideal situation is what we currently have, where the rights holders on the production committee sell the rights to a Funimation or a Sentai Filmworks,
Mm-hmm.
and then at that point, it's basically hands off.
Yeah,
They
because
have their money. They have as much the minimum amount of money that they can expect from selling that license. And if it sells more in the U.S., then past a certain threshold, then they start to get a little bit more. The production committee starts to get a little bit more from the success of that anime.
yeah,
But if they sell the rights to an anime and it flops in the U.S., then they already have their money. Doesn't matter.
exactly. It
They're
is
not on the hook for the poor performance of that show in another country. Not only that, they're not even on the hook for producing that show for another nation's demographic.
exactly. They don't have to invest more into it. They're going to get their return on investment regardless of how it performs here, because they already
Exactly.
got that. They got that initial investment, and they will get a little bit of splash over when, like, they start to be able to sell more of their figures and stuff. So, like, it's a win-win for, say, Good Smile Company if they're on the production committee for something that gets big in the States, because they're making their return on investment without having to pay for the translation. They don't have to pay for packaging. They don't have to pay for the server space for streaming this stuff, but they're still making money off of it because they're selling things to American audiences.
Exactly.
So that is what people mean when they're talking about a middleman, that it's not even operating in their own best interest, because they can't really make their return on investment without either trying to sell a streaming service or trying to sell physical copies of this stuff. And that's if you look at what Bandai Entertainment used to do, if you look at what Aniplex of America is still doing, they're going for a more premium experience, because a lot of collectors want to have something that is a premium product. They want
Yep.
something with art books and little extras, all that kind of stuff. It's very similar to how the Japanese domestic audience does with Blu-rays, because
Exactly.
The Blu-ray is not just a way to watch the anime. The Blu-ray is a product of the anime, and that's something that you get to sell. Meanwhile, you look at Funimation, they're selling like 5 episodes for $20, single volume Blu-ray DVD combo pack things. And they are trying to go, like there was something that Funimation used to do called the save line, where it
Yep.
was just a DVD, a case for the DVD, and that was it. It was just a plastic standard case. And that was for people who couldn't really afford to buy the extra premium things and stuff like that. But you're not going to find a lot of people who are not going to want to buy an extra premium thing, because they could just, it's not that they're watching, they're just finding a way to access the anime. They're trying to get something that is a physical manifestation of something that they enjoy.
Right.
All right, with
Yeah. Go for it.
no, go ahead.
Yeah. It's I think as far as the North American industry goes. I think that's a healthier way for it to move in,
Hmm.
but I don't necessarily see Funimation moving in that direction. I don't, and my memory is not perfect, but I don't remember them having a very good track record with regards to like doing things for collectors.
Oh yeah, they don't.
Sentai does
Absolutely
that
not.
quite. Sentai does that pretty well. I have a few of their collector's editions, and they're pretty packed. And they
AO
also did the thing where they got the Legend of Galactic Heroes thing.
and that's the thing is that like you have Sentai, you have Aniplex of America, you have G Kids, which only does movies. You have all of them. They're doing really good with that because they understand that business model. Meanwhile,
Yes.
with Funimation and Crunchyroll, they spent a good 5 years trying to appeal to people who don't watch anime on their own. They were trying to market to people who they were trying to get into anime, trying to get into this space. And they aren't the kinds of people they're not fans. They're people who want to watch something, sure. They enjoy things, sure. But they're not fans. They're not going to spend more than $20 on merchandise for this stuff. They're not
No,
going
they
to
like
have
things that happen to be anime.
they like things that happen to be anime, and that's something that I respect. I respect if you want to watch an anime, and I've said this before, there can be anime for anyone because it's just such a wide breadth of the medium that you have so many different things that there can be an anime for anyone. But on the same note, not anyone can be a fan. Not anybody can be an otaku. It's
Right.
a different level of the consumption of this thing. All right. I think we can do a short break, and we can return after that.
Sounds good.
All right, welcome back. Uh, in keeping with fighting stereotypes, neither of us have a conspicuous empty Arizona iced tea jug next to us. So, the past 2 years have been very interesting for humanity in general. They haven't been exactly conducive to a lot of things, but in other ways, it has shown that we have to find resilience in unexpected circumstances. There have been a lot of good opportunities recently, the past couple years, but there has been something that has been missing from the subculture, otaku subculture in general, for a long while, and that would be in-person meetups. That would be
Yes.
conventions, things like that, that humanize us, that keep us, for lack of a better term, in line in ways that online interaction does not. And I don't think I'm alone when I say that I've noticed a lot of this toxicity that has been going around, especially on the aggregate social media websites. So, as we are easing off of the circumstances that have put us in that situation, that is, we have started to see conventions come back. What does that bode for the future? How can we get back to normal, essentially? Or abnormal? And it's... I think it's going to be a long process to get back to that normal, or that abnormal. Because we have a lot of people, especially the younger fans and the younger otaku who have just come in. They might have come in because they had a genuine interest in anime before, or they might have come in because it was just one of the several media things that they could watch while they were under some sort of lockdown. You have a lot of older people too who just got into anime as a alternative to other things, and that's something that we used to be able to incorporate these people over time and have them start to interact with other people in neutral environments, so they could humanize people who were into things that they would find objectionable. For instance, like slice of life kinds of things, moe, like the, not moe is in like the true definition of moe, but moe is in the perception of a moe aesthetic, the K-On style. Back in the day, in the before times, 2 years ago, if you were a new fan and you went to a convention, you'd start to meet people who are into the same thing as you, but they'd also be into other things. And because you know that person that you spent time with and enjoyed your time with, you know that person is a good person or an enjoyable, chill kind of guy. But they're also into lolly stuff, and you find that out later, and it's like, well, back then, you'd just be like, well, this person, I know them, and I know that, like, say, maybe they have a girlfriend who isn't really fitting into that lolly stereotype, or something else that just indicates to you that this isn't a person who has predilections that apply to real life. Things like that. I'm just using that as an example. But that is something I feel is missing because we're all interacting behind avatars the past 2 years. And if you're just coming into the subculture in that environment and just seeing these people that you can completely dehumanize without even considering that you are dehumanizing them, that personal interactions, they're gone. So all you're left with is this hostility and having this image of somebody in your head that they are everybody that you interact with online is going to be a neckbeard that needs to touch grass or doesn't go outside, when we were all told not to go outside anyway. So that's an issue that I've noticed start to come to fruition in real life. It is not something that I have personally experienced. I've been to a few cons since lockdown started to ease up, but that's something that I've noticed happening to other people. I'm not going to name any names because I don't want to like bring attention to some of these people, but there is an artist who is being stalked by people who have been sending her hate mail and death threats on Twitter, which it's online. I'm not going to give any. I'm not going to say like because you got a death threat that means you're doing the right thing or anything like that, because it's like it's online. You get death threats for literally everything.
Right.
So that doesn't indicate whether you're better or worse than somebody else. But that kind of stuff wasn't really happening as much in person. And now you have these people who, and if you think about it, somebody who's 16 years old right now, they have spent 1/8 of their entire lives not having any amusement parks, not having in-person schooling, not interacting with people in large groups, not meeting people online in neutral spaces, not being exposed to other people. And the younger you go, the more of an actual perceptible fraction of their lives has been under those conditions. And those people are just starting to go to, in many cases, their first convention. And for a lot of people, it's their first convention after 2 years of having to abstain from that, having to be afraid of going out, and they have to adapt to this new abnormal. So, now that I've monologued about this, do you have any thoughts on that?
It's kind of it's a difficult situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
Because the compounding of several issues. You have the the elimination basically of in-person interaction.
Yeah.
Plus the slow, I don't know how to put it, but like more and more like otaku and anime fandom conversation is concentrated in places that are not designed for that.
Exactly. It's another issue.
It creates an environment where a lot of stuff that a lot of stuff that we could otherwise agree is harmful to subculture is permitted to happen because there's no moderation. There's no way to tell people like, we don't do that here. And then when it comes time for in-person interactions to come back, that sort of
the
online
norm.
social media battling starts to play itself out in real life because there hasn't been a way to rein that in.
It is just because that has been just the normal that these people have been, that everybody has been exposed to, is that you go online, you open Twitter or whatever other website you're using. The norm is seeing people argue about things. The norm is seeing this hostility among people, and then when you bring that into real life, you either have people who are going to be hiding behind a rack of clothes and taking creep shots of somebody, or going up to an artist alley booth and recording the interaction and saying some off-color comment or something and then running away. These are all things that I've seen online. That because and I don't want to say it's just kids because it's not, but most of these interactions that you're seeing are teenagers who they're going to their first conventions, or they were just starting to get into something, and then they just have this perception of like, if you're above a certain age and you're doing Genshin Impact fan art and you're selling it at like Anime NYC or something like that, you're considered to be trying to hook up with kids or something like that. That's just an example. There are countless other things that I could be talking about, but it's just like that is the most egregious thing that I believe otaku have been accused of in the past couple years. Where that kind of thing didn't happen. You didn't hear that back in the day. And
It's kind of like like you had, let's call it the first generation, where back when anime conventions were mostly about, this is the place where you go to watch anime, because almost no one has anime
unless
so
they were doing tape trading.
Exactly. So you go to the anime convention and people would show that the anime they have.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people theorize that the modern anime convention culture that had gone through like the 2000s through the 2010s came about because a lot of the old guard more or less refused to interact with younger fans.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how that culture shift occurred as a result. It seems like this is now the third generation where you have people who mostly interact online repeating that behavior in the convention space.
Yeah. I wonder,
partially because the people from the previous generation of convention culture either didn't teach them proper ways to behave, or sometimes they tacitly agree with what they're doing. They just don't want to do it themselves.
That's another thing that. So first of all, I think you're being a little bit conservative in thinking of like, I wouldn't call it generations of anime fans. I know that you didn't mean to attribute it to age, but I would think of it more as waves. Because
yes. Yeah, that's a better word for it.
Because you'll have people who get into anime at the same time, but one of them is 16 and the other one is in their 20s at that time that they get into it. So I would consider them to be part of the same wave, and in a lot of ways they will interact with the medium in the similar way.
Right.
So I think if it's being a little conservative thinking that this is only like the third wave, I'd say this is like going back in American terms or North American terms. So you talk about like the first wave would be the sci-fi cons bringing the tape trading and Betamax stuff. I guess like you could even go further back and talk about like Battle of the Planets and Speed Racer, but those people didn't know that they were watching a Japanese product. I guess I don't want to get into the history too much, but I'd say that it's a little bit conservative to think about it as this is only like the third or fourth wave. We're several waves deep, but
yeah, it's a simplistic way of portraying it. What I'm saying is this is a new wave of convention culture.
It's a new
created by either a non-interaction between the previous wave and this current wave, or a tacit endorsement of the bad behavior of this current wave.
And I have to wonder, like, you do make a good point, but I have to wonder if it's these old guard people who are still in control of the convention space. Their tacit approval of what's going on. Where is that coming from? Is it coming from they wish they could have done this back when they were the big, like they were the new people in town back when they were forming the subcultural space? Because they know for a fact that this has always been a place where you have a higher proportion versus normal society. You have a higher proportion of minority people who are in positions of relative social power. You have, I refer to them as the con moms, the women who step up and they organize photo shoots. They're the ones barking the orders at everybody. We're going to be doing this character next, and we're going to do this character next. And I'm going to make sure that I do all of the ship pairings that everybody loves and all that stuff. And they have their 2-hour window where they have this part of the convention space that they're doing this huge photo shoot, and they nail it flawlessly. You have black cosplayers, which they still have faced some like off-color comments, of course, but they still enjoy a lot of popularity, and they have a group of people who are very supportive of them. And they know, these old guard people know that we have always been the space, for lack of a better word, safe space for people who are not exactly accepted in general mainstream society. So I wouldn't accuse them of engaging with this in bad faith as like we need to get rid of sexism in the anime fandom space, because it's like we have overcome that in a lot of ways that even general society right now, as much as they're trying to pretend that they haven't reached that goal yet. And this is another thing that I always say, is that both in the US and in Japan, the otaku space is a very matriarchal sort of subculture. You have, without like female fans, you wouldn't, or without female creators, you wouldn't have Comiket. You wouldn't have apparently 60 or 70% of manga. You wouldn't have a lot of doujinshi, and like their majority of the creatives and the leaders in the space. And this applies on both sides of the Pacific. So I know that these old guard people are not thinking that they need to be more progressive, because we were already more progressive than general society even now, going back 10, 20, 30 years. So I'm wondering if they're using it as a marketing tool, or if they're trying to maintain their control over the subculture by trying to play into whatever seems to be most popular at the time. And they're trying to maintain their positions of power, as opposed to giving it off to handing off the torch to the next generation and to the next generation.
I think it's somewhat of the latter.
Mm.
But I'm reminded of when there was one convention in the UK, I believe, that made a big deal out of coming out and banning Ahegao clothing.
Yeah.
And then a whole bunch of conventions followed suit. And the response to it was mostly positive on social media, because a lot of people were cheering that Ahegao clothing was being banned. And what it looked to me like was less of, oh, okay, it's good that we're banning this thing because it'll protect kids from seeing this and that, and more of, yay, this thing that people I don't like to wear is being banned.
Yeah.
A lot of the motivation seems to be, let's do things that will discourage people we, for some reason, have problems with from being in the same physical space as us.
It's a spite thing. They're doing this. It's people who are excited for a lack of freedom to do certain things out of spite, in my opinion.
Right, right, because they're they won't do those things, not because it's not things that they do, even though that might not be things that it might not
Yeah,
be things that they do, but they don't do those things because they associate those things with people they don't like.
exactly. And it's not even that they wouldn't enjoy doing those things if in a vacuum. They would probably be enjoying all these things, but they're thinking about, if I am socially seen wearing an Ahegao shirt, if I am socially seen enjoying um Dragon Maid, if I'm socially seen doing this or enjoying that or interacting with these people, I am going to be considered one of them. And I want to be not one of them.
Exactly.
I want to be able to straddle that fence kind of deal. And
It's social
yeah.
pressure, and they're using social pressure against other people, and they're subtly using social pressure within their own groups to keep each other's behavior within an arbitrary level of acceptableness.
And that's something that I feel as if we would go through on individual levels. We would go through cycles where people would start to think along those lines, but then it would come back around and it would be, no, all the people who wear Ahegao clothes are not like, I don't know what the what's the word? Sorry. The stereotype of people who wear Ahegao clothes is, but they would encounter people wearing Ahegao clothes who are not part of that stereotype. So they would be forced to reckon with something that went against their preconceived notions because they went to a convention space and they saw this in an environment where that's not the case. Their preconceived notions are not true there. But when you remove that general interaction, or you try to reform the convention space to get rid of that the possibility of that interaction, it's just going to build and build and build until you have the whole touch grass weeb, this neo perception of what weeaboos are, of which is weirdly still attached to something that like a stereotype that hasn't been true in over a decade. The stereotypical Pocky munching, inserting random Japanese phrases, which I think lampshaded works out pretty well in the case of like Calliope Mori, but
Yeah.
it's because we don't have that convention space to interact with each other that we just continue on with just thinking like everybody who likes this is going to be somebody I don't want to socially interact with. Everybody who does this is going to be a sweaty neckbeard or whatever Wojak image that they come up with. That's another thing, as a side note, is just like how much Wojaks have taken off, because that's what you can do to win an online argument now, is just to post the incel Wojak or post the NPC Wojak, because it's like you're not humanizing these people anymore because they're behind a screen.
Right.
And that's something that's been infecting the conventions, not the convention space, but it's been infecting the subculture to the point where conventions are really the only way to get around that. And I think it's going to be an uphill battle because things are going to get worse before they get better. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
I'm halfway.
yeah.
So I think there's a way things can get worse before they get better. Honestly, there's a way things can get worse and never really get better. But there's also a way that things can not get a whole lot worse before they start to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Back some months ago on NCR Radio, I talked about a convention demographic split,
Mm-hmm.
and that's currently not really coming to fruition. It's something I'm frustrated about.
Yeah.
But what I was talking about was this was back when I think this was at the tail end of 2020. One of the conventions, and I don't remember what convention specifically,
Mm-hmm.
was Anime Dallas and UltraCon in Florida. It was
Yeah.
two conventions. And what had happened was these conventions were going on at the tail end of 2020. And on social media, there was a big uproar because there were a lot of people who thought that A, these conventions shouldn't be going on, and that B, nobody should be going to these conventions if they do hold events.
Mm.
So what people had started doing was putting together lists of people's social media profiles who were like posting that they were at the event.
Mm-hmm.
And part of what I was talking about with the convention demographic split was if this paradigm continues where there's going to be where the big uproar around conventions is going to be whether or not people should be going to conventions at certain points in time or with or without certain restrictions,
Yeah.
then what would happen was you're going to have two sets of people who are at conventions. You're going to have the sets of people who care about that and the sets of people who don't care about that. And part of why it's a demographic split is because those are going to be two very different types of conventions.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see a lot more of this kind of the kind of stuff that spawns from online.
Yes.
At the same conventions where you're gonna see people who are the same kinds of people who would have made a list of people who went to Anime Dallas. You're gonna see a whole lot of that online stuff at those conventions, whereas the people who don't care going to the different conventions, you're gonna see a lot different kinds of behavior. It's gonna be my theory was it's gonna be a lot less restrictive and a lot more like conventions were back in, say, like the early 2010s and beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not necessarily something that's happening now. It's frustrating.
It's
it strikes me as a lack of initiative from the many people who are tired of this kind of paradigm taking over the anime convention space.
Yeah. I think it goes beyond, and I'll be honest with you, and I've been saying this for a long time. Those certain restrictions, give it 5 years, nobody will remember who was on what side of what argument on that, because they'll have moved on to completely different things.
Yeah.
And nobody up here in New Hampshire, I still will wear I still will follow restrictions that don't exist anymore, and nobody around me is following those same restrictions. And the only reason I'm doing it is because first of all, I have a collection of masks that are just like fucking styling, but I also just don't want to get sick with general things. Like it's been really nice not having a sore throat in 2.5 years. That has been wonderful. It's a side effect. I was never afraid of what we've been trying to avoid, but at the same time, it's just been, I just don't want to be sick in any sense of the way. But you had a lot of people on both sides of this argument who were like actually looking down on each other for whether they were wearing a mask or not, and they don't care anymore. They just completely moved on to the next current thing. And I'm wondering if we're not going to have a demographic shift or a demographic split, if it's just because people are going to stop caring about the same things that they cared about before. So you're not going to have the red team versus blue team stuff anymore, because a lot of the people from the red team are now on the blue team, and now people on the blue team are on the red team. Or it moved on from the red and blue team to the purple and green team. So a lot of people from the red team and from the blue team are now on the green team. That kind of deal. Because we're moving to different things. And that's one of the reasons why I've always said that we should be outside of the political spectrum and not politicizing people's identities when it comes to being in the convention space, because those things don't apply in the convention space. Those things don't apply in the subculture space. It's a different ballgame with different rules, different situations, different uphill battles, and different goals.
I think part of the issue is that on a subcultural level, in the Western subculture, definitely, there has been a spectrum of political identities that have been permitted.
Yes, that is something where I agree absolutely that there have been a certain because when you're excluding something on purpose, you are implicitly including other things.
Right.
And when you start to have that conversation when nobody really prompted it, except for outside of the bounds of subculture, that's when you start to have a thing where it's like, oh, so if I wear a Tanya the Evil cosplay, I'm going to be judged based on real-world political things that I didn't intend? And that I think it's going to I don't think it's going to be per se a demographic split and this is the worst case scenario. This is not something that I'm talking about like is going to happen, and it's not something that I want to happen. Generally what I want to do is like remember the old times where you could just be shitposting with a Soviet flag at Anime Boston and nobody really judged you for it.
Right.
Or Ahegao clothing. Nobody really judged you for it. It was just like you're having fun, you're shitposting, you're being irreverent, and that's part of the fun of being out and about with people in the subculture, is that you're already irreverent if you're wearing a friggin' cosplay in the middle of a mall in Boston, or you're walking through the middle of downtown Hartford wearing a cosplay, or any of these other situations where people are like, wow, those people are easily identifiable because they're not dressed like the rest of us. That kind of stuff. It was just, I wanted to go back to that general, nobody's judging each other based on what they're ascribing to them based on, okay, you're wearing this cosplay, that means that you take these political opinions to heart, or you have these convictions, and it's like, no, I just liked the uniforms from Mazinger or something like that. And that's the direction I want it to go in, but the direction that I am fearful of is that we're going to have things boiling. It's going to be red versus blue, and then purple versus green, and then yellow versus pink, and then it's just going to continue on where it's just like the next current thing is going to be the thing that's dividing everybody. That is my biggest fear. And I think like the best case scenario, if it's just going to consistently be red versus blue, but then in that case, a lot of people will feel like they're walking on eggshells regardless of what convention they go to. Like if you went to a convention that had a mask requirement, and you're fine with wearing a mask, but you don't want to wear a mask the entire time. Or you go to a convention that doesn't have a mask requirement, but you still want to wear a mask. You don't want somebody to come up to you. You don't want everybody to come up to you continuously saying, you don't have to wear a mask, by the way, or
Right.
trying to start an argument. Because this idea that people are being bad by being neutral on things is concerning, and it's not conducive to a good subculture. It is not conducive to a good convention. It is not conducive to bringing new people in and having them discover things that they wouldn't have discovered on their own. And it's not conducive to any of that. It's a concern that I have that I feel like it's going to be continuing on unless we either have the old guards start to engage with and show the merits of the old way that things were done to the newer generation, or we start to create a new batch of conventions in the ashes of the phoenix of the old conventions that are, a lot of them have been going under. That's another thing that I feel like we have an uphill battle on, though, because you have where a convention goes out of business, you will have a larger, let's say a corporation that does conventions like Crunchyroll might want to have, like what PAX does. Well, you have PAX Prime and PAX East. You'll have Crunchyroll Prime and Crunchyroll Boston and Crunchyroll Dallas and Crunchyroll. Where else in the US are you going to have conventions? But yeah. But you're going to start seeing more of these corporatized cons as opposed to the like not for profit or regional conventions that are not part of a larger scheme. Sorry if I moved on to something completely different in the middle of that rant, but
But no,
yeah.
I think what is going to have to happen is we're going to need some new conventions.
Oh yeah.
Because it's clear to me that a lot of the people currently running conventions aren't interested in bringing things back to a level where it's not acceptable to do the kind of online stuff that we're seeing go around in conventions. It's clear to me that in terms of there being a window of perspective, like a spectrum of perspectives that are acceptable, the current people running conventions are well within that spectrum, and they're not interested in widening that spectrum. So I think what's going to need to happen is we're going to need some new conventions, not even in the ashes of of conventions that are shutting down, but competing with those conventions. Because the issue that I'm seeing, especially in terms in conventions, and especially in terms of conventions that are continuing restrictions, there definitely are people who have chosen not to go to conventions that have certain restrictions. But the issue with that, and not necessarily the issue, but where that falls short is, it's one thing to say, okay, I'm not going to spend my money here, but it's another thing entirely to say I'm going to go spend my money here instead of here.
Yes.
And the problem we're having is there aren't options. So like the problem with anime conventions in general, in terms of there being that spectrum of acceptable perspectives, is that there are a few options that don't have that same spectrum. So there's you don't get to vote with your wallet in terms of what you want convention culture to be like. And I think that's really the reason that there's going to have to be some new conventions if this problem is to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have a choice between convention A and convention B, convention A has a certain type of culture and convention B has a certain type of culture. Whichever convention manages to attract the most people by being the convention that's having the most fun, just purely having the most fun, that's going to be the culture that wins out.
Yeah, because that's what you're going for in the end, is having fun. Why else are you spending $60 on a pass to go into someplace? Is it to gain access to spend more money? Yeah, of course, but you also want to, you're there to interact with other people. You're there to be like, oh wow, look at that person who's into this other thing that I'm into. Maybe I can swap contact information with them. Oh, it's my first convention. I met somebody who's a friend of one of my friends. Maybe I can spend the next 12 to 13 years of my life dating her and eventually proposing to her at some point. It'll happen
Yeah,
eventually, but
exactly. But that's like, so like it's that versus trying to do that with a whole bunch of arbitrary rules put in place by people who exist on social media.
yeah.
And it's not difficult to see which is the better option, but part of the problem that I anticipate is going to happen, because it's happened with some conventions like that have dared to buck the trend, is they're going to get whipped up and down by these same people who live on social pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And they're because it's going to be difficult to compete in the market.
It's
they're going to try to social pressure them out of existence.
that
The people from convention A that does all the online stuff are going to try to pressure convention B out of existence.
if I have anybody who listens to this who is part of a convention, is staffing a convention or something along those lines, in some sort of position of power over a convention, what I would suggest is consider where you are getting the feedback from and what kind of form that feedback has been taking. Because you have not gotten feedback from the majority of the people who would be going to your convention anyway. You are getting feedback from people who are engaging with online fear. You're getting feedback from people who are trying to follow a certain hierarchy or a certain perception of what should be done versus what should not be done, when on every normal on year, your feedback comes from walking around the space and seeing that everybody's having a good time. And for the past 2 years, the only feedback you have been getting has been from people who are saying, I won't go to your convention unless you do this. I won't go to your convention unless you do that. And you know what? We saw the same stuff happening before every convention, before every Anime Boston, before every AAC, before every Anime Next. You saw it before every Otakon. People who were saying that we should do this, we should do that. And you know what they do? They did every year before recently. They went anyway, had a good time, didn't even notice that those things were or were not happening. They didn't care. They didn't care. They were there to have a good time. They were there to meet their friends and meet new people. So, in the end, these people are not, even if they're saying these things online, that's not going to represent how they're going to feel in person.
Right.
That's not going to represent how they enjoy their time in the convention. They might be kicking up a fit before, and they might be kicking up a fit after, but during the convention, if you don't see somebody actually come up to you and say, "Hi, we have a major issue," that's the only time where you should look at that extremely negative feedback and actually take it to heart. And that's something that I feel as if the post-con, and this is something that AMA Boston did that I really like, is that they have one of the final panels of the day of Sunday is usually a feedback panel where people bring up things that went on during the convention, and they use that to improve on the experience next time. I understand that they're trying to be preemptive, and that a lot of these conventions are dealing with municipal, local, national issues. I understand that they're also dealing with people who are threatening to have a problem with them or try to post online about how terrible they are for this or that, or who they have on as their guests, or what they aired in the screening rooms, or any of this other stuff. I understand that you're going to get a lot of that feedback, and that's the only feedback that you're getting right now. But the majority of the people who are actually going to want to go to your conventions, they're not the kind of people who are going to be adding you on Twitter and saying something nasty. They're not the kind of people who are going to see every single time you post an update on your Facebook group or on your Twitter or something, and they're overwhelmingly in support of what you're doing and stuff. Those aren't the majority of the people who are going to be going to your convention. Just a thought.
It's really easy on social media to post a response to something because a convention is doing something you don't like, as opposed to the late Sunday feedback panel at Anime Boston. You know that the people at that panel, number one, they were there, and number two, you know that they really want whatever feedback they have addressed because they stayed all the way to the last panel on Sunday.
Yeah.
It selects for the people who are actually serious about wanting something from the convention.
Exactly.
And part of the problem is you do have a lot of people who they're gassed up by things happening outside the convention, and they start to feel like those things are important to impose upon every aspect of their life, including the anime conventions that they go to.
Yes.
And that becomes part of that spectrum of acceptable perspectives.
Yes, exactly. It is applying things that are not either not relevant or not conducive to anything that the convention is trying to get done.
and
frustrating.
The convention, and part of the reason why is a lot of conventions under no state or municipal order are continuing with restrictions. I feel like part of the reason why is because the people running the conventions desire those restrictions, that's fair enough.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think people should I think that there should be an alternative for people who either can't or don't want to go to conventions with those types of rules, and then I think the market should sort it out.
Exactly.
Whether or not that thing should stay long term.
Exactly. That's it is first of all, yes, it is a have the market forces do that, but second of all, a very good point that you made that I have failed to make up until this point is that there's a lot of these conventions that are they're not doing their restrictions based on legal issue, whether it's state, municipal, national. At this point, I think we can all agree that there was never a national response to this.
No, there
So
was not.
it has been all local and state. So if you have a state or a locale that does not have those restrictions and you're continuing on with those restrictions, either it's because you are not paying attention to the CDC, what they're saying to do, which their communication has been completely off the wall this entire time. So
I could forgive people for not knowing what the CDC wants people to do.
exactly, because the CDC doesn't know what the CDC wants people to do.
Exactly.
But yes, you have that, but if nobody with a scientific background is, or an actual scientific background, and I'm not talking about people who are just like, I was a nurse once or something like that. I'm talking about like actual immunologists, virologists, and, you know, people who have an understanding of if they are immunocompromised, how they are immunocompromised, and how they are able to avoid that on their own personal recognizance. Those people are not saying the same things that facilitate these conventions need to have these restrictions. And it's as if they're saying that they are doing their own. They're thinking about their own science, like they're thinking from their point of view on what is scientifically important or not. But if you're basing it on just like, oh, we feel this way, or we feel that the at our convention that gets 20,000 people per year, we got about 1,000 people who are telling us that we need to restrict access to anybody who does not have a booster or something like that, then you have to actually start to weigh what your options are. You have to actually think about, if the state isn't having me do this, why should we?
Right. And what it comes down to a lot of the time, or what it seems to me it comes down to a lot of the time, is, well, we already told people that we're having these restrictions, and a bunch of people cheered for it. So if we go back on them now,
Yeah.
they're all going to get upset.
But are they going to? If there's a convention that announced restrictions 3 months ago, let's say, and they're having a convention in 2 months, if the physical reality of the world changes and people stop, or not, you know, within reason, the physical reality of what's been going on in the world changes, and people stop being worried about these things, you're not realistically beholden to the decisions you made at a time when things were completely different.
I think it depends, and this part of this goes back to that spectrum of acceptable perspectives.
Yeah.
I think it depends on whether or not the people who ended up cheering the restrictions are actually paying attention to the physical reality of the world.
Or if they even care, or if they're just
Right.
trying to perform for other people.
Or if to they're trying to do the same thing with the Hagao clothing, is keep people who they inexplicably don't like, who they don't know, but who they've stereotyped into that this person does a thing that I don't like. Keep those people out of the convention space.
Mm. That I have a little bit more faith in people who are organizing these conventions, in that either A, they're not going to see the marketable viability of restricting certain people from going in unless they're like actual criminals or something like that,
I
versus
don't think it's the people running the conventions. I think it's the people cheering the new rules.
oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm processing this, but
Yeah, I think the people seeing the new rules cheer because
Yeah.
not all of them,
Yeah.
but a non-trivial number of them. They see the new rules and cheer because there's a group of people they've been taught to hate over the past 2 years, and they see those new rules as okay. These new rules will keep people out who I've inexplicably grown to dislike over the past 2 years.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, exactly. It's
So and that's regardless of whether or not anyone actually gets sick. It's regardless of whether or not it actually prevents anyone from getting sick.
and
Because
it
we've had conventions that have had these restrictions and have had people get sick. And
exactly.
it kind
I
of it
was
kind of
at one
blew
of
over.
them. Yeah. It did blow over. It was a big story for a while until people realized that that convention had tighter restrictions than a Knicks game that was going on the other side of Manhattan, which, it was a Knicks game, so you probably aren't going to be getting as many people who are going to be interested in a Knicks game as you are
Yeah.
in Anime NYC,
Yeah.
which, like, even, I will say this, I had a great time there. Even though I was working it, even though the entire time I had, like, maybe a few minutes that I had to do my own thing per day. And that was essentially like I had to, on the way to going to the restroom, I could pick up a few things, and then I'd be on my way back from the restroom to the booth. I could pick up a few things, and that was pretty much my entire experience there, aside from outside of the exhibition hall hours. Um, it was a good time, and I didn't really. It was something that I didn't, as much as I either disagreed or agreed with certain aspects of the restrictions, which that's my own opinion and it doesn't reflect reality in any form other than the reality of what I am willing to expose myself to. I trailed off a lot there, sorry. I just had a great time doing that. And then when I see people who are saying, like, oh, they had a convention and that means that they were flaunting guidance and stuff, and it was like, no, it was done according to guidance. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to do this. If you have to have an entire contingency of police officers outside directing the flow of traffic, that means that you had to get this cleared by the highest levels of government in the
Yeah.
city and the state. So they were doing everything along what they were required to do by one of the most restrictive states in the country, and they still had some transmission. So if you want to completely eliminate the possibility as opposed to weighing the risk, you get to decide where to go. And if that means not going to a convention, that's not you are not required to go to a convention. It's not like going to the doctor's office or going to a dentist or going grocery shopping.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've been saying since like April of 2020.
Yeah. You
If you
have
are concerned about getting sick, or if you are concerned about getting other people sick and you're not willing to take, or if you're sick and you're not willing to take that risk, you probably actually shouldn't be going to conventions at all.
Yeah.
Whether or not the convention has restrictions should be meaningless to you because you shouldn't be going. If that's your concern, if you're concerned about getting sick.
Yeah.
Otherwise, do what you're going to do and take whatever precautions you deem necessary to protect yourself, which is most of the reason why I'm not convinced that a lot of the concern is about whether or not people get sick. It seems to
Yeah.
me a whole lot like this is going to prevent people I've learned to hate from being in the same space as me.
Because if you look at it, you can apply that mentality and you can apply what we've been seeing to a lot more than just this one thing.
Right.
And I'm wondering what it's going to be applied to next is the big concern that I have.
Right.
Is because you're already starting to see it with, like, you saw trickles of it with the Ahegao ban, which I'm not even sure if anybody cares about that anymore.
I've not seen anybody but me talk about it in the past like 2 years.
And I've also been seeing a lot of Ahegao. Up here in Manchester, I saw, it was a few weeks ago, I saw somebody just walking up Elm Street wearing a sweater with Ahegao on it. Just a thing. It's just a part of our culture now. Deal with it. But it's... I'm wondering what it's going to be applied to next, and wondering if it's going to be conducive to having a better convention experience, or if it's just going to be more of the appealing to the normies kind of mentality.
I mean, I wonder if any of these battles that have seeped into the convention space have ever been conducive to a better convention experience.
Well, here's what I'm thinking that it would be conducive to a better convention experience. Not tolerating when people are harassing artists.
Mm.
Not tolerating when people are harassing cosplayers or social stigma outside of the realm of convention space or enjoying characters. If we're going to stop accepting a lot of things that we have just been tacitly accepting for a long time, because either these things can go away on their own, or we can actually just stand up and say, hey, I don't feel comfortable with what you're saying about my cosplay or my friend who's cosplaying, or I don't feel comfortable with how you're treating this person at the artist alley. That is what I'm wondering. That is something that I think would be conducive to actually improving the con experience, is to stop accepting hecklers who are screaming at people over their taste in media becoming like somehow reflective of their personal values. People who are like and this is something that people who are accuse us of gatekeeping on. Like, if you don't like certain content, don't look for that certain content. That
it
is,
seems like if it takes away an avenue for
expression.
Well, more so, it seems like if it takes away uh, anything that painfully online people use as a weapon against people,
Yeah,
we don't address it. We don't talk about it.
exactly. And that's something that we didn't really have to deal with previously. Like, you go to a convention and all the people who are like painfully online, who are complaining about all this, that, and the other thing, and oh, I don't want this, oh, I don't want that, oh, this is bad, this layout is terrible, you accepted this guest, you have this guest is an issue and stuff like that. Everybody in the convention, either they're like, I agree with what they're saying, but I'm just not going to go to that person's autograph signings, or I don't agree with what they're saying and they're kind of being a little bit of a prude about this, and it's like the general public who went to these conventions didn't care about these things. And it's that's the voice that you don't hear, but is the most influential, because it is the background noise. It is the feedback that is being given tacitly. The people who are not complaining about things are saying that, yes, what you did was fine, or yes, the way you did this layout was okay, or yeah, it sucks that you have to deal with this stuff because the state has been on your tail about this, but that's something that you guys can try to work around as much as possible, because this isn't just with the restrictions because of the pandemic. This is something we've been dealing with going to Anime Boston since 2013.
Yep.
This is almost 10 years of having to deal with a disruptive, slightly repressive mandate made by the state and local governments that impacts the convention scene. And that it's something that we had to work around, and it was like something that we learned to not complain about as much because it's something that we have to deal with that we'd like to get rid of as soon as possible, but that's something that needs to be expressed a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the issue, is that there are definitely a lot of people who go to the convention and don't complain about the stuff, but
and their opinion matters more than the very small minority who are complaining about things that either can't be changed or shouldn't be changed.
Correct. But they don't voice themselves in terms of, hey, I'm really happy you guys did this. I really had a great time meeting this person, or I really had a great time doing this thing, opposing the, oh, this layout is terrible, how dare you invite this person, so on and so forth. A lot of the vocal feedback is going to be negative, and on some level by nature. Because if you have negative feedback to give, you're motivated to give that negative feedback. Whereas if you have positive feedback to give, on some level you feel like your patronage is that positive feedback. The fact that you went to this event, or the fact that you went and saw this person, on some level you feel like that's positive feedback.
Yeah. And the majority of the positive feedback isn't going to be given verbally.
Right.
I don't know if that was a door or a shotgun, but it's not going to be given verbally. It's going to be given in this, like, I went, I enjoyed myself, I stayed for the entire thing. Or what I'm planning on doing is I'm only going to go for a day because it's kind of outside of what I want to spend on a convention, essentially in my backyard. But yeah, that's something that, because they haven't had that feedback, they can only go by what's being said online until they have their next convention and see who goes, who has a problem with what, who doesn't have a problem with what, and they'll be able to get more feedback from that. And I believe far more likely than not having to go through metal detectors to get into Anime Boston, I guarantee within the next year or two, we're not going to have to show pieces of paper or put things on our faces in order to gain access to these conventions.
Yeah, I've always said that that's going to be temporary. The only thing I was wrong on was I had said that it wasn't going to continue into 2022, but here we are.
Yeah. It's nobody can predict the future, but it's just, there is no market force that says that the majority of people are going to be continuing to go to places where they will be made to feel as if they need to go out of their ways to take precautions to prevent themselves from having either a major inconvenience or a major health issue.
Right.
Because if you're going to be afraid of that kind of stuff, you're going to stop doing it anyway. But that's, and I feel like we're focusing a little bit too much on the one aspect Like we're focusing on the waves rather than the tide.
Right. True.
If that makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying, and that honestly is going like remembering over the past decade, decade and change.
Yeah.
Been going to anime conventions since like 2008. So over the past decade and change, there have been a lot of shifts over the course of time, and the majority of them, I would say, not good.
Mm-hmm. Really?
Like a lot of the time, well, on a macro level, previously, like you could get into a lot of conventions carrying an airsoft gun if you had disabled it.
Yes.
A
That
lot of that kind of rule has been scaled back, as far as I understand, almost across the board.
almost across the board, essentially across the board, because that was something that I remember when I was going to Anime Boston AAC or Anime Boston, and then looking at people who were talking about Kineticon and AAC, where they were like, yeah, you can have airsoft guns as long as they have an orange tip and they're disabled.
Yep.
Now that's completely that's not a thing anywhere. And the reason I don't agree with it, but the reason for it is not because of safety and security within the convention. It is for the comfort and for the like just to appeal to people who are not even going to the convention. People who
Right.
might see somebody who's, and this is something that I'm pulling up some ancient history here, doing a photo shoot on a beach near a convention and has the police called on her
Right.
because she had something, not even a like real world rifle model. It was a fake rifle. So somebody who could be walking around with Yoko Littner's sniper rifle, which if you look at the design of it, it doesn't even look like a sniper rifle. It looks closer to a broomstick.
It looks like no real gun that exists.
Exactly. But you will still have people who are going to be calling the police. And it's something that they are, and I understand they were trying to be preventative and not like proactive and not reactive, but it also is something that has restricted how we get to interact with fandom and how we get to interact with our costumes. It's a restriction that, and as much as I understand why, I wish didn't have to happen. And it feels awful because we are not doing this for our own sake. We are doing this for the sake of people that aren't even going to be interacting with us in a normal situation anyway.
It seems like a big trend has been we're restricting this thing across the board in the subculture convention space in order to make people more comfortable, where so in the case of airsoft guns,
Yeah,
you probably shouldn't be carrying your airsoft gun around outside the convention space in the first place.
exactly.
If you're doing that and you end up having problems, that should have been a precaution that you took before you decided to carry an airsoft gun to a convention.
Exactly.
In the case of, I was just thinking about this and I completely forgot.
Sunday
So
brain.
in the case of, say, in the case of, not to go back to this, but in the case of health restrictions,
Yeah.
it should be your responsibility to take precautions for yourself if you're concerned about getting sick.
Exactly. Like I understand if like I don't want anybody to be within 6 feet of me if I don't know them, but that's something that was a thing long before the pandemic, and
Yeah.
it's just a personal thing. But yeah, you should be able to make those calls on your own, but we're also talking about something that the subculture had to deal with was we had to say outright cosplay is not consent. We had to tell people cosplay is not consent because and they were a minority of people, but they
Yeah.
were still going to these conventions anyway. They were considering cosplay to be like if I am dressed up as Kaoru from Oran High School Host Club and I see a Hikaru, I'm going to or Hikaru, I'm going to run up to them and jump on them.
Right.
If I see somebody who is cosplaying somebody from maybe I'm doing an anachronism here, but a cosplay from Dramatical Murder, and I have a yaoi paddle, I'm going to send them to the freaking hospital. That kind of stuff. We had
Right.
to actually state because there's a lot of these people who were not socially there altogether. We had to say, "Hey, you need to stop this." And it's the same thing with that. It's as that we also have the 6-2-1 rule, which the 6-2-1 rule for people who don't know is for every day of every day of the convention, you should have at least 6 hours of sleep. You should eat 2 real meals a day, and you should shower at least once a day. And there are different. Some people will put it down to 3 hours of sleep, which is ridiculous. Some people will say that you need to take at least 2 showers during the course of a 3-day convention, which understandable. Uh, I don't know where I saw the 3 hours of sleep because somebody was like, "Oh, it's the 3-2-1 rule, 3 hours of sleep." I'm like, "Oh, what?" That's I don't think I could do that. Ugh.
Yeah, that's called a nap.
Yeah, that is called an aspirational nap. But yeah, it's generally it can be 5 hours of sleep, it can be 6 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep for some reason, 8 hours of sleep. The numbers will change around. Sometimes it's the 6-1-1 rule. You need to have at least 1 real meal a day and 1 shower, or 3-2-1 where it's I don't know what the 3-2-1 was again. It was something. There's a lot of different versions of it, but still, the point still stands that it's like people needed to be reminded you need to bathe and feed yourself and sleep.
Right.
And so I understand that they start to approach this with a hey, we need to tell people what to do, otherwise, they're going to drive themselves off a cliff. We need to tell people what to do, otherwise, they're going to start drinking out of the toilet bowls and stuff like that. And it's a very it's something that it's a very like matronly way of viewing your convention attendees, where it's like you have to have everybody under the same you have to treat everybody under the same like circumstances. Like you have to treat somebody who's going to not care about their own health the same as somebody who is a hypochondriac. But
Right.
it's I guess what I'm doing right now is bitching about something that I don't have a solution to, because I can't really think of a solution to, hey, a lot of us have been not really socially like aware enough to not start harassing people for wearing certain cosplays and stuff, which I feel like cosplay is not consent should also apply to people who are cosplaying characters that people don't like. Kind of. Maybe that would be a good idea to not, harass people for cosplaying Tanya the Evil or cosplaying Toho when they're male or any other situation like that. But
Well, so I think it would be great to expand the cosplay is not consent paradigm to that, because but and I did remember that thing I was gonna bring up.
Yeah.
We did have that rule at Anime NYC a couple years ago where you're you're not allowed to cosplay anything that could be approaching anything
Nazi.
Nazism.
Yeah. So that
And that went to include Tanya the Evil.
that was Tanya the Evil, Jinro. It was a very vague situation, and then I saw somebody who was a, I think now ex staffer at Anime NYC, who was saying, "Don't wear anything military to begin with," and it's like, that's a significant portion of this this subculture that you're saying can't do what they want to do. And now look at a few years later, we're selling tactical gear at Anime NYC.
Yeah, exactly. And so that so part of the part of where I think the issue with that paradigm lies is, again, it goes back to there's a spectrum of acceptable perspectives.
Yeah.
So I guarantee you that he was not talking about like an Earth Federation uniform
Yeah.
from Gundam, but he may very well have been talking about a Xeon uniform from Gundam.
Yes. Which is weird because it's like, aside from maybe like hats and the shape of helmets, vaguely isn't going to be like screaming to somebody like, yeah, this is like a Nazi uniform.
No.
Now there's cosplays that I've done which are entirely made out of current issue Federal Republic of Germany uniforms that could be construed as Nazi uniforms. And yeah,
and therein lies the issue. And that's another one of those rules that was implemented, as I understand it.
Yeah.
Was implemented for the comfort of people outside the convention.
Exactly.
For the comfort of people outside the subculture.
And
on which and on that level, it might be a callous thing to say, but if you get harassed outside the convention because you're wearing something that closely resembles a Nazi uniform, that might be on you.
Yeah, because you went out. So two things. One, take off the hat, put on something else, take off part of the uniform or something. Just make it so you can easily blend in, or just go to the local, what do they call them in New York? Bodegas? Yeah, bodegas. Yeah. You could just go to local bodega, pick up like a Reuben sandwich or something like that, and then head back out without any issue. Like, there's a lot of weirdly dressed people in New York City, so it's not going to be an issue. I mean, also
a big coat. Anime NYC is in the middle of winter. You're not. Nobody's gonna be upset at you for wearing a coat in New York City.
Exactly.
In the middle of winter.
And if you go down, if you just take a walk down 42nd Street to go to Times Square, you're going to be hearing the Black Hebrew Israelites who are going to be saying things that are a lot more objectionable than your cosplay.
Yeah. so like that's sort of the thing is, I think that in terms of so here's part of how I would handle a demographic split is, okay, the A conventions are what we have now. The B conventions are going to be like, okay, you're old enough to make decisions for yourself. Here's a bunch of things we don't recommend you do, like carry airsoft guns outside the convention, like wear potentially offensive costumes outside the convention, here's a bunch of stuff we recommend, but we're not gonna kick you out of the convention for having an airsoft gun we know is disabled.
Exactly.
We're not gonna kick you out of the convention for wearing a costume that we know you're wearing as part of a costume, as a part of a series.
Yeah. It's
and And if you if you have problems outside of the convention because you're carrying around an airsoft gun or because you're wearing an offensive cosplay, that's you're that we're not responsible for that. We can't be
Exactly.
held responsible if you decide to carry around an airsoft gun outside the convention and you get arrested.
And that's something that I don't. So this is on two fronts. In that one, that we didn't normalize that to a point where it's like we didn't normalize saying like that's on you what you do outside of the convention. We will understand like what you're doing inside the convention, but people who don't know that you're wearing that as part of a costume are going to have a problem with it outside of the convention. We've first of all we've treated this as like a babysitting event almost. But second of all, and babysitting for, a lot of these people are adults.
Yeah, babysitting for 25-year-olds.
Yeah, and more. But second off is that we have been conditioned to not stand up for ourselves.
Yes.
And this is it goes beyond just like who's running the conventions. It goes beyond all of that. It's just on a fundamental level, we don't stand up for ourselves enough. We don't stand up for ourselves when we're getting bad products. We don't stand up for ourselves enough when we're getting like trashed on Twitter. We're not standing up for ourselves enough in a lot of these cases, and it doesn't help that a lot of people are using the like, oh, my trash babies and I'm literal garbage for enjoying this and all that kind of stuff. That is a major issue. And that mentality that we have that we're not standing up for ourselves in pretty much any circumstances, never mind like circumstances where we are definitely in the right, or it's just like normies wouldn't understand kind of deal. It's like, you need to understand that we're not operating under the same social pretexts. We're not operating under the same general social rules. And we're not really expecting ourselves to when we're enjoying these things. But
right.
Forgot where I was going with this. We're not interested in normal people, essentially. And we shouldn't be holding ourselves back for the comfort of people who don't understand us, even when we try to appeal to them. Because, like, there are people, like, a certain, I guess you'd call them a gimmick account, but they're a account that only posts a certain type of content. And they made a comment, they made a comment about, like, well, don't compare the things that I like to, don't compare things like Evangelion and Dragon Ball to seasonal pandering crap and shonen pandering crap. And it's like, Evangelion was seasonal pandering crap. That doesn't mean it's bad, but if you apply your mentality there, it's still going to be considered pandering seasonal crap, just older pandering seasonal crap. It's not crap, it was pandering, and pandering is it's just such a nothing burger of a concept. It's like, ooh, wow, you made something that people will enjoy. You're pandering. It's just the most bullshit concept.
It's a word that people only use because it has a negative context. When they could say, if they said, oh, this show appeals to people.
Yeah.
It would be a meaningless statement.
Exactly. It is a meaningless, saying something is pandering is meaningless because everything is pandering to somebody, otherwise it's made for nobody and nobody's going to enjoy it. But the reason why people are applying this like, and I know that there's different reasons people will be elitist about things, but I think the main reason why they're doing it is because they got clapback for enjoying anime, and they're like, no, you think that anime is just all like hot girls and stuff like that, but I enjoy art. I enjoy anime that's art. I like anime that isn't there just to titillate. And then they come up with something absolutely stupid, like they say Cowboy Bebop is not titillating. I'm sorry, Faye Valentine's entire character was based on that titillation. Or they're saying that there's nothing titillating. It's all like lampshaded and shaming otaku. It's postmodernist whatever for Evangelion. It's like, or when they say that Miyazaki hates otaku, and then like they show you watch the documentary of when he was making The Wind Rises, and he was just like, he's like, yeah, I need to get Hideaki Anno in on this. I need him to voice the main character for no other reason other than he's Hideaki Anno. And he's never done voice acting aside from like little bit roles or like weird shit and stuff like that. And then it's like, oh, I need to have Hideaki Anno over here, not because I want to discuss something very important or anything like that. I just want to talk about planes with him for like hours on end. And then he turns around and says that, oh, otaku are terrible. It's like, my brother in Christ, my brother in Ebisu, you are an otaku. You have shown us that you're an otaku. It's this self-hating, self-deprecating shit that's that people are trying to apply to themselves in order to get acceptance from people who, in the end of the day, you can talk about how much like, oh, this is actually this has artistic merit because it's Evangelion. It's not like Konosuba, which has or ReZero that has no artistic value or anything like that. At the end of the day, a normie's just gonna be like, nubile young anime girl not wearing clothes. Nubile young anime girl not wearing clothes, but it was made 30 years ago. It's the same thing to them.
Yeah, it's, and probably never will have any interest in it, regardless of what you have to say about it.
And the only reason you're doing it is for your own selfish gain and your own selfish ego. You're trying to protect your ego. You're trying to save face by not looking like you're one of them.
Exactly. And it's like you say, it's a refusal to
we are trying to be in this own little insular bubble while at the same time trying to not be in our own little insular bubble, and it's like you need to choose one lane or the other.
It's like everyone's out for themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah, people out here to save face for themselves because they don't want to potentially be associated with people who watch anime that people outside the culture might find distasteful. You have people who run conventions out for themselves, trying to enforce rules that discourage people that they don't like from joining in on the in-person. Everyone's out for themselves, and there's very few people out here who it seems like there's very few people who see the culture as anything more than this is my group of friends and then everyone else.
Yeah, it is. Nobody's thinking about it as part, like they're not thinking about it as being, can I create something that will improve the community, or can I watch my consumption habits to make sure that I'm like making sure that things are going to improve for the community. It's the 3 C's that I talk about. It's consumption, creation. Some of us are thinking that we're big fish in a small pond, and we're not considering like, what am I adding to other people's enjoyment of things? And that's the of the issue I think we've reached upon, is that like there is a lot of that inability to consider yourself as part of a greater whole. And I'm not somebody who's saying that you can't be an individual or anything like that. Because it's like your individuality is what you bring to the community. But you need to consider, like, is what I'm doing or what I'm saying or what I'm proposing, is it going to bring more people in to enjoy themselves, or is it going to bring more people in to just raise the bottom dollar and make sure that there's quarterly profit? And this can be applied to a whole host of different things, but
Yeah.
we've been at this for about 2 hours, so I think we can wrap it up. I've been Shinden9, and
I've been Tom Forster Anubis.
actually, yeah, I want to talk about some of the things that or just quickly pitch the things that you have done. So Time of Forcer Anubis has published a book called
Otaku Entrepreneur.
Otaku Entrepreneur, because I'm almost confused. I almost confused it for Otaku Quartermaster, which is a convention specific dealer that I've been working with for about a year and a half now. So he has a published book, Otaku Entrepreneur. You can find it on his website. Is that on Iyashike?
I have a link to it on Iyashike. You can also go to otakuentrepreneur.com and you'll find it there. It's also on Amazon if you search up Otaku Entrepreneur.
Yes. You also have essentially a whole host of other projects and things that you've been working on.
So there's iyashike.moe, and that's my otaku lifestyle and self-development blog. There's otakuentrepreneur.com. That's my otaku business and finance blog. I've been working on an otaku-based web forum that's at suzumiya.moe, as in Haruhi Suzumiya.
Mm-hmm. It's
and
so something
that's all I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Something that I will say about Suzumiya.moe is it takes the forum, the old school forum model of discussion, but it's not like a pro boards forum where it feels like you're on an outdated, outmoded, badly coded website from like the Web 2.0 era. It feels very fresh. It's very easy to use for the end user, so I definitely suggest that. So I will talk about my stuff now. So I have been working with Otaku Quartermaster. We are a dealer who does the convention circuit around Texas and the East Coast. We specialize in fiction and nonfiction books. We also do airsoft and tactical gear for cosplay purposes. But it's not cosplay level. This is like prosumer grade tactical gear. We also do cultural items, like you can get rice bowls, sake cups, and things like that. And I can also, I guess, pitch Asobi Industries. We only have one patch design. It is based on the flag of Daten City from Panty and Stocking, but it's also a funny little homage because it's a combination of the Japanese flag, the US flag, and the classic Shimapan mint stripe. It's a cool little flag patch that has I've had a few people who are very interested in it, so I would suggest picking that up. You can find that at the link on my Twitter at AsobiFM. You can also find my personal Twitter at Shinden9. And yeah, that's about it. I don't know if NTR Radio has been planning on coming back, but they do have a backlog. If you are interested in any of the things that we have discussed here, you will definitely find a lot of interest in a lot of their backlog. And yeah, that's it. I have been Shinden9 with
And I have been Time Force Anubis.
Thank you very much for listening, and please remember to have fun as you are playing.
Right.
Oh